headlines. Washington defends the possible deployment of a U.S. missile system to South Korea and brushes off Beijing's resistance. It's a challenging week for Seoul in its diplomatic maneuver between the two superpowers. President Park Geun-hye meets with the heads of the rival political parties. The president calls for bipartisan support for economic revival, while the opposition leader calls her policies a failure. And we meet Korea's so-called active seniors who are living life post-retirement and spending money along the way. Welcome to the program. You're watching Primetime News. Live from Seoul, I am Kang, Chery.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. We begin with Korea's diplomatic super week, where officials from China and the United States are holding back-to-back talks with South Korea. In today's meeting with Seoul Foreign Ministry officials, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Daniel Russell commented on a Chinese official's remarks from yesterday. Hwang Sung-hee tells us more.
Just a day after China voiced concerns over the possible deployment of a THAAD missile defense system in South Korea, the United States said China doesn't have a say in the matter.
Well, I find it curious that a third country would presume to make strong representations about a security system that has not been put in place and that is still a matter of theory.
Chinese Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs Liu Jianchao told reporters in Seoul on Monday that China hopes South Korea will consider Beijing's concerns before deploying the U.S.-led missile defense system. Beijing is against the deployment over concerns that the radar system, which can cover 1,000 kilometers, could be used to monitor mainland China. But following talks with senior South Korean officials in Seoul on Tuesday, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Daniel Russell said THAAD is purely for countering North Korean threats and that its deployment is up to South Korea.
It is for the Republic of Korea to decide what measures it will take in its own alliance defense and when.
South Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se echoed Russell's words while speaking to reporters, but added there were no official talks about THAAD deployment.
As for THAAD, there is currently no development. The government will consider all factors, including security, before reaching a decision that will maximize our national interest.
But as the Foreign Ministry teeters between Seoul's closest partners, the Defense Ministry was much more blunt, saying that neighboring countries should not weigh in on South Korea's security policy. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
And meanwhile, North Korea had something to say about this issue as well. It's blamed the United States for stoking tensions on the Korean peninsula. North Korea's ruling Workers' Party newspaper, the Nodong Sinmun, said Tuesday that Washington is trying to become a main strategic power in the Asia-Pacific region by building up its military presence. And here's another tough decision for South Korea to make in its diplomatic maneuver between China and the United States, and that is whether to join a new China-led regional bank. There are many pros, but the one con is a possible dent in Seoul-Washington relations. Connie Kim reports.
China aims to create a new financial order centered around Beijing with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Launched last year, it aims to provide project loans to developing nations and promote economic growth. But the U.S. opposes its establishment as it believes Beijing could use the bank for political purposes. During talks in Seoul on Tuesday, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Daniel Russell conveyed Washington's concerns to senior South Korean officials and called on China to ensure transparency for the new financial institution. Those who take a cautious stance say South Korea joining the AIIB could be a stumbling block in strengthening the South Korea-U.S. alliance because it goes against the U.S.-led Asian Development Bank. Supporters of Korea becoming a founding member of the AIIB say it would be a win for Seoul economically and politically.
Washington and Japan are the biggest shareholders in the Asian Development Bank, so Korea would have very little decision-making power. If South Korea joins the AIIB, Seoul will have a greater chance of participating in infrastructure projects for developing countries in Asia.
Looking ahead, analysts also say Seoul's participation in the bank could help secure stabilization funds and capital for building infrastructure post-reunification. Pundits point out, however, that it's important for Seoul to expand its share in the AIIB to increase its decision-making role. With Korea mulling over whether to join the China-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, experts here are calling for a diplomatic strategy that doesn't favor either Washington or Beijing, but that's in Korea's best national interest. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
North Korea is believed to be the culprit behind the recent data leaks on South Korea's nuclear power plants. An interim probe by local authorities found that malicious codes used in the cyber attacks were similar to those used by North Korea in the past, and that they originated from IP addresses in the north. Pyongyang, through its Uri Minjokgiri website, denied any involvement in the hacking. Last week, a group of hackers that claimed to have leaked documents about the nuclear facilities in the past released additional files and demanded money in return for not selling the information to other countries. A UN special rapporteur on North Korea has called for an investigation into alleged slave-like conditions for North Koreans sent by the regime to work abroad. Activists say the workers are used to earn foreign currency for the cash-strapped Kim Jong-un regime. Shin Se-min tells us more.
The United Nations human rights investigator for North Korea said he will look into allegations that 20,000 North Koreans are working in slave-like conditions in countries like China, Russia, and the Middle East. Marzuki Daruzman, the UN Special Rapporteur on North Korea, told Reuters the workers are, quote, bonded laborers or slave laborers who receive poor compensation for working long hours. NK Watch, a Seoul-based human rights group, says roughly 100,000 workers are sent overseas to 40 countries and make some $3 billion in foreign currency every year for the Kim Jong-un regime. There was no reason given for the discrepancy in the estimated numbers of workers. The human rights group also called for an investigation into host countries' involvement in the program. This isn't the first time the practice has surfaced. Activists say North Korea has been using its manpower to make money for the Kim regime since the 1980s, with some of the money being spent on luxury goods. But the practice has been accelerating under the current leadership as the number of North Korean workers abroad is said to have increased by 35,000 since 2012, based on figures from the New York Times and NK Watch. Activists say the practice may have increased because of tighter international sanctions on the regime that have prompted it to seek new sources of revenue. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
President Park Geun-hye sat down for talks with the leaders of Korea's main rival parties on this Tuesday. The meeting garnered a lot of attention since it was the first time the president held talks with her election rival and now opposition leader Moon Jae-in in 2 years. While they did agree that reviving the economy is the country's most pressing concern, they differed on how to breathe new life into the economy. Choi Yoo-sun reports.
After a brief exchange of greetings with the leaders of the ruling and opposition parties, President Park got down to business, addressing her recent Middle East trip.
앞으로 이 운동 순방의 결과들이 결실들이 우리 국민과 또 기업들에게 더 큰 혜택으로 또 그래서 다시 한번 경제가 크게 일어나는 어떤 초석이 될 수 있도록
She also urged the parliament to swiftly pass pending bills aimed at creating jobs and revitalizing the economy. While promising his party's cooperation, opposition leader Moon Jae-in said that the government's economic and welfare policies have failed to improve the people's livelihood.
We need to change policies and increase household income for growth. I propose first addressing 4 livelihood tasks.
The 4 tasks Moon listed were a significant increase in Korea's minimum wage, generating welfare funding by expanding taxes on corporations and high-income earners, and addressing the problems of rising housing rental prices and household debt. President Park rebutted Moon's claims, saying the opposition's proposed artificial income increase could lead to more taxes and reduce corporate activity. She added the government is already taking measures to handle the 4 tasks listed by the opposition leader. As for improving inter-Korean relations, Moon said Seoul should first seek to boost economic cooperation with Pyongyang and make efforts to hold an inter-Korean summit this year. While President Park has opened a channel to more actively communicate with the leaders of both the ruling and opposition parties, time will tell how Tuesday's meeting will affect state affairs down the road. Choi Yu-sun, Arirang News.
Gone are the days when candidates campaigned with posters and leaflets. Now they're jumping on the social media bandwagon to draw in potential young supporters. Kwon So-ah takes a look.
As Korea's rival parties gear up for April's by-elections, they're trying to win the hearts of young voters through novel campaign methods than the usual posters and leaflets. This teaser shows a young unemployed man complaining about a situation, when suddenly the ruling Saenuri Party's chairman appears in front of him.
괜찮아요. 많이 놀랬죠?
It's an advertisement for an application naming contest. It's hoped the app will boost young people's participation in the political process. The main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy is using webtoons as a means of explaining hot political issues in an easy-to-digest way.
We're doing this in an effort to not let complicated policies be discussed only at the National Assembly, but to connect with young voters.
Due to high social network service penetration, these video clips and digital comics spread quickly, making it easier for the parties to spread their vision to the younger generation. But there are concerns about whether this is the best way to go about campaigning.
When young people look at content on SNS or webtoons, they simply enjoy it and they don't take it that seriously. That's why there needs to be a more thorough understanding of cultural phenomena and young people's opinions, especially when the subject matter is so heavy and important.
Some say that rather than focusing too much on how to make themselves more likable, the parties should come up with practical strategies to tackle the biggest problems facing young people in Korea, such as the high youth unemployment rate. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Samsung Electronics has announced a new strategy for helping businesses adapt in the era of the Internet of Things, otherwise known as the impending trend where everything we touch or interact with will be connected to the World Wide Web. Kim Ji-yeon explains the strategies to get businesses on board.
Korean tech giant Samsung Electronics has laid out a new strategy for helping businesses integrate the Internet of Things into their operations. It's providing business-to-business solutions in various areas, including retail, education, hospitality, healthcare, finance, and transportation. At the CEBIC Computer Expo in Hanover on Monday, the company's president and chief marketing officer, Hong Won-pyo, announced the creation of Samsung Business. He says the brand will help businesses boost productivity with tailored solutions for saving energy and inventory management. Samsung Business will unify previous B2B solutions, including its Knox security platform and a smart signage display system to help enterprises adopt the Internet of Things. Hong added, though, that the company needs to overcome major challenges to accelerate IoT adoption, namely platform compatibility, data analysis, and security. Until now, the tech giant's IoT services have targeted the average consumer with smart health and smart home devices. The company is also trying to gain a competitive advantage in the sector through the faster connectivity. It set a goal of connecting all of its products and devices by 2020 with a 5th generation network, which is 1,000 times faster than 4G LTE. Kim Jung, Arirang News.
Being a college graduate is often considered a great privilege, but these days it's not always the case, especially when it comes to getting a job in Korea. New research shows that more college grads are out of work compared to high school grads. While the unemployment rate for high school graduates dropped 0.2 percentage points from 2005 to around 9% last year, the rate rose for college grads from 6% to nearly 10%. Analysts say this is due to the lack of quality jobs for college graduates to go after, and that employers are hiring a larger number of workers straight out of high school. Well, thanks to medical advancements and a growing interest in health and fitness, people are staying more active even in what was once considered to be old age. And for Korean retirees in their 50s and 60s, a fresh start at life also makes them one of the country's major consumer groups. Kim Min-ji has a story.
After working 20 years at an insurance company, Byun Young-do now spends most of his time outdoors. He's taken up photography as a hobby and even invested $500 in a new camera.
I'm living for myself, doing the things I've always wanted to do. I don't have any debt or major bills, so I spend about 1/3 of my monthly allowance on myself.
Byun is one of the country's so-called active seniors.
In Korea, active seniors are people that are socially and economically active and willing to spend money to improve the quality of their lives.
Unlike generations before them, a growing number of Koreans in their 50s and 60s aren't relying on their children for financial support. They are independent and have disposable incomes. And they're spending big on leisure activities and buying up items like cameras, art supplies, and outdoor gear, and even paying for continuing education.
Now that my children are grown up, I have time to spend my money and enjoy my own life. I play the guitar and take singing lessons.
So what's made them different from their predecessors?
Many members of the baby boomer generation are well educated, had good paying jobs, and were able to save up. They were the main consumers during Korea's industrialization period and have more interest in leisure, fashion, and health than seniors of the past.
Data shows consumers aged 50 to 64 spent $40 billion in 2010, and in 5 years their buying power is expected to triple. Experts say this comes as more than 80% of them are returning to the job market after retirement, especially to pursue the work they were passionate about when they were younger. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Millions of Israelis are heading to the polls as voting is in full swing in the country's general election. This as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is seeking his 4th term in office.
With more, we turn to Paul Yi at the News Center. Paul, the political campaigns running up to this vote have been intense, and many are calling this election too close to call. But it appears Netanyahu made a last-ditch effort to spur some support.
That's right. Whether it was a strategic move or a show of panic, the incumbent Israeli leader made a huge election promise at the 11th hour that may have wide implications for the international community. Addressing a rally of supporters ahead of Tuesday's vote, Netanyahu vowed he would not allow the creation of a Palestinian state if he is re-elected. He also said that conceding any land to the Palestinians would leave Israel vulnerable to attacks by Islamic extremists. Netanyahu's Likud party has doubled down on security issues, a move political watchers say may prove unwise, as socioeconomic problems have emerged as a top concern among voters.
Even the security issue, which seems to be advantageous to Netanyahu, has been criticized by former leaders of the country's security services, Mossad and Shin Bet. This has posed another negative impact on Netanyahu's support rates. Some insiders of the right-wing group are also bored of him and want him to lose.
Meanwhile, the center-left Zionist Union, led by former Justice Minister Isaac Herzog, has pledged to repair ties with the Palestinians. Israel's Central Election Committee is reporting a higher-than-average voter turnout compared to last year. More than 10,000 polling stations are open nationwide to accommodate the almost 6 million eligible voters. And turning now to Russia, following an unexplained absence from the public eye, President Vladimir Putin is marking his return with a show of force. According to Russian news agency on Tuesday, a defense ministry source said Russia plans to deploy nuclear-capable bomber jets to Crimea as part of ongoing defense exercises. It comes as Russia's Northern Fleet in the Arctic launched military drills of, quote, full combat readiness, moving to action some 40,000 troops as well as dozens of warships. Meanwhile, the European Union has reiterated that it would stick to its policy of not legitimizing what it called Russia's illegal takeover of Crimea. It says pro-Russian supporters are marking the first anniversary since Moscow's annexation of the Ukrainian peninsula. And finally, shifting gears now, China's e-commerce giant Alibaba is making waves in the tech industry as it showed off its latest security feature for consumers. CEO Jack Ma demoed the new feature at the International Computer Fair CeBIT in Germany on Sunday. He said the developing project was called Alipay. It allows smartphone users to make secure payments through facial recognition. Alibaba is just one of the hundreds of Chinese companies at the expo, showing off their latest services and gadgets.
China is a huge player in the global economy, and therefore, not surprisingly, everybody wants to participate in China's economic vitality. The influence, however, is going to be somewhat mixed at the company level, and we're going to have to see how management at the individual company determines how it wants to play the Chinese story.
Meanwhile, on the sidelines of the international trade show, Chinese Vice Premier Ma Kai met with German Chancellor Angela Merkel. He said China was willing to work with Germany to deepen bilateral cooperation in innovation, finance, and manufacturing. And that wraps up our look at international stories for now. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Hello everyone, I'm Stephen Che with the Sports Brief. South Korea finalized its national team roster for the New Zealand friendly match later this month, and manager Uli Stilica is taking his chances with some new faces. Swapping out 6 players from the Asian Cup roster, Stilica said he made his choices based on their current form. Ji Dong-won and Kim Bo-kyung, both on last year's World Cup team, are the biggest additions. They'll meet Stilica for the first time. Meanwhile, Kim Ki-hee and Yoon Suk-young are back to full health. The coach also chose Kim Eun-sun and Lee Jae-sung after they impressed the German in training camp and in their K-League matches. Staying with football, Reading defeated Bradford in the replay of their FA Cup quarterfinal match to advance to their first semifinal in 88 years. Putting an end to Bradford's Cinderella story, Reading took down the third-tier league team 3-0, never looking back after a double within the first 10 minutes. The championship side now faces Premier League elites Arsenal, their most formidable opponents to date. They'll face off on the 18th or 19th of April. Meanwhile, an IOC delegation is back in Korea for its 4th meeting with the 2018 Pyeongchang Games Organizing Committee. IOC Coordination Commission Chair Gunilla Lindberg, Organizing Chief Cho Yang-ho, and their entourage spent the first day checking on the Gangneung Ice Arena, home to the figure skating and short track events. Now, with test events kicking off from next February, both parties are concerned about the progress of the venues and are expected to address the issue in the coming days. Finally, Korea and Japan's sports rivalry returns to the volleyball court with the V-League top match interleague championships back after 2 years. The last meeting of the men's and women's champions of both domestic leagues took place in 2013 in Japan. The 6th iteration returns to Seoul on April 12th, with the Korean teams looking to avenge their losses the last time out. Of the 5 events, the Korean men are ahead, having secured 3 wins, but the women trail with just a single win over the Japanese teams. That's all I have for now. Your weather's up next. Good night.
Hello, and welcome. I'm Kim Bo-kyung with your weather outlook. Toxic fine dust has spread to more regions compared to a couple of hours ago, and in Seoul it has reached 122 micrograms per cubic meter, which is approximately 2 to 3 times the normal levels. At the moment, clouds have moved in nationwide as showers are set to drop down south this evening before spreading nationwide. So up to 80 millimeters of heavy rainfall will drench the southern regions, while about 5 to 10 is expected for the capital. Now, it looks like this round of showers will provide the much-needed humidity to the air, as a dry weather alert is in effect for the eastern coast of Gangwon province, where humidity levels are down in the low 20s. On to tomorrow's ratings. Seoul reaches a high of 15, Gwangju 16, Busan hits 13. Meanwhile, Daegu peaks at 20, Dokdo hits 10. Those are the updates I have for you now. I'll see you soon.
And that's primetime news for this Tuesday. Thanks for watching. I'm Kang.
And I'm Sean Lim. Have a great night. We'll see you soon.